Hi, I'm Steve Sellers with Omen Comics, and I'm the writer and co-creator on White Druid and Michael Nero. And today we're going to go into our Omen Comics Secret Origins, this time featuring a character that I would say is probably the most successful one that I've done today for Omen. You may disagree, but I kind of feel like he's one of them. And that is Michael Nero. So, Michael Nero was a character that I did not come up with, at least not the original idea for. It was given to me by Michael Nonnelly, who was the creator of the series. And I already knew that he had a certain amount of background on him. I knew the idea was that he was a magic Sherlock Holmes. He was the one who came up with the third sight and those sorts of elements. And but I don't think he quite had put it together the way that he'd wanted to. At least that's my understanding of the situation. That he needed somebody to go and kind of refine the character in a way that worked because for some reason he wasn't able to click completely with him. And that does happen. There are definitely certain ideas that you create where you can sort of tell that, yeah, this is not for me. If I came up with a horror character, I would probably give it to Mike. So I can't fault him for that at all. I can understand completely, why he would say, yeah, let's have a second pair of eyes on this. So that's where he brought me in. And I looked at all of this, and I have to say, the Sherlock Holmes archetype is one that I'm very, very drawn to for a number of reasons. My grandfather was a Sherlock Holmes scholar, an amateur one. And so I have read Holmes since I was, I want to say, 12, 11 or 12. So I was least familiar with a fair amount of Doyle. I hadn't read like every single story, but I'm familiar with Doyle pretty well. Certainly the major ones. And I have the kind of like that personal connection, which made that interesting. But I don't think that for me it was just about Sherlock Holmes. I brought in other influences that were inspired as well. Certainly, in terms of modern portrayals, it's kind of hard to get away from Benedict Cumberbatch in Sherlock. That was a series that I had enjoyed quite a bit, and at least the portrayal of the character and the way that the character was modernized and the way that Cumberbatch played him, at least to a certain extent, resonated with me. And I wanted to borrow a little bit of that energy, not a whole lot. I didn't want to make it like a total copy of BBC Sherlock, but there was a little bit of that. I was probably more influenced, notably, by a cross-gen title from back in the early 2000s, I want to say, called Ruse. And that was their version of Sherlock Holmes, which took place in a sort of like a fantasy version of Victorian London, um, with the idea that you have a great detective who is just completely cold and shut off, and who is very often a jerk to everybody, and kind of needed that emotional tie to humanity, to sort of, shall we say, make him more of a human character. Somebody who kind of empathizes with those who he helps. And so there was a little bit of that kind of really got into it. I just thought that series was brilliant, especially the early Mark Waid stuff, although the later stuff after he left was also quite good, and I do recommend that. But if you kind of notice in the first issue of White Druid and Michael Nero, I do take a little bit of a nod to the early scene of Ruse where Simon Archer comes in and basically solves the case within 5 seconds. I wanted Nero to have kind of that moment, but in a mystical twist on it. And so this is why you kind of have him coming in and being able to exorcise the demon and and doing the things that he does, because that establishes who and what he is. The idea that he is Michael Nero Demon Slayer was Mike Nunnally's idea for him, or at least what he had called him early in our drafts. And so, I wanted to like do a little bit of a nod to that kind of stuff, while also giving a little bit of a nod to Simon Archer, because that was kind of like partly my way of getting into the character. And so, what I ultimately did was, think about, okay, how does the third sight how does affect you? How does being able to not only be the world's greatest detective, but also be able to see ghosts and demons and things from other dimensions, just visions from other planes, and things that are Lovecraftian in terms of being unspeakably awful, and have to see that all the time, and have to find some way to block that out. Mike's way of dealing with it was in part with drugs. That's not something I have a whole lot of experience in personally, but Mike knows a lot more on that score than I have. So, he kind of helps me a little bit with those things as they become relevant. But for me, it was just more finding ways to cope that, wouldn't necessarily involve that. How would he sort of look at the world, when you have this ability? How would you try to shut that off? And I just basically came up with the idea that this is the reason why he's such a jerk to people. um, because ultimately what he's trying to do is sort of using it as a coping mechanism. It's his way of dealing, with the crazy things he sees. But at the same time, I see him as somebody who does care to a certain extent, and um, he's just trying to hide that, and this is sort of his way of dealing with that. So the Simon Archer sort of influence is more like the exterior life, where the interior life is, he cares in a way. I mean, he's definitely driven by the desire for a challenge. He's looking for that case that keep his interest. But what it really is a distraction away from all the crazy things he sees. Because if he's focused on his work, if he's focused on the stuff that he's trying to solve, then he's not worrying about Lovecraftian demons snarling in the background. He's not worrying about those things. He's not worrying about the crazy things that he sees, and try to ignore them, because if he hyperfixates, then he doesn't have to worry about that. So that was a large part of my thought process with him. So everything that you really kind of see with him is sort of an affectation that he puts on as a way of coping with this horrible thing that he has to deal with, and he has to deal with it constantly. And probably most people would have dealing with this would probably go insane. And it's only because Michael Nero is such an exceptional person that he's able to cope with it at all. And that's really where the conflict comes from. But it helps that he has Luo Shi, who is his mentor, who is kind of like his father figure in many ways, to kind of help him through these issues, find ways for him to cope without the use of drugs, and, basically help him live a more productive lifestyle or more balanced lifestyle. That's not always easy because Nero is a jerk, and he's very difficult to deal with for anybody on a given day. So everything's like a day-to-day struggle for him, and that's the way it really should be. When you have a kind of severe problem, it's a managed condition. And so for Nero, everything is a managed condition, but the way that he deals with it, ideally, is that he wants to deal with it by solving all these cases, putting the ghosts he sees to rest. Not just because partly because he believes in what he's doing, and he believes in helping these people with these cases, but also because it silences the ghosts and makes the pain of having the third sight easier to cope with. And so all of that comes together, and I think that Nero is one of the more interesting protagonists that I've had to deal with, and that I've written. And he's always one of those characters who is kind of fun to write, especially when he's being a jerk, because that kind of allows certain things to come out that normally would not be a productive thing to bring out. So in a way, just writing the character in itself can be that kind of coping mechanism. So I can see where Nero is coming from in that sense as well. So yeah, Nero's an interesting character. There are always so many different things that I think about with him and find out with him, and so many things that you learn just in connecting him with other characters and putting him in different situations and seeing how he jumps through those hoops. And yeah, so I hope you will read White Druid and Michael Nero if you haven't already. It is available on Comixology, Amazon Kindle, It's now currently available on whipgoodpublishing.net, I believe. And with the first 2 issues up there, and I think we'll probably be seeing the remaining issues as they come out in time. So with that, I hope I'll just go ahead and leave it here. Thank you very much for your support and for listening. Hit hit the magic bell for notifications. And until then, this is Steve with Omen Comics signing off.